Good evening, everyone. Well, the international order may be breaking down, but everyone here needs to behave and be quiet now. Anyway, it's great to see you all. It's great to see such a packed house, despite such challenging times, not only from the headlines, but the microbes, and I'm thrilled to have you all here. I'm Daniel Benjamin. I'm the president of the American Academy in Berlin, and given all the things that are changing, I thought I would mention a couple of things that are staying the same. One is that we are a nonpartisan institution, and also that we remain wholly dedicated to strengthening the transatlantic relationship, which has benefited both Germans that's nice to hear, which has benefited both Germans and Americans beyond measure. And although this is a lonelier job than it was just a few days ago, that will continue so long as I'm here. Anyway, thank you all for joining the first of two Axel Springer lectures this semester here at the Academy. In the words of Politico, my favorite Axel Springer publication, this quote was the week European fears about Donald Trump's America began to come true. In just the last few days, America's leadership seems to have switched sides in the conflict in Ukraine and has accused the victim of Russian aggression of being the party guilty of starting the conflict. And at the Munich Security Conference this past weekend, where both tonight's speaker and I tried to make sense of what was going on, we heard a disparagement of European democracy and an encouragement of the far right that had previously been unimaginable from a U.S. leader. So it is extraordinarily timely that Gideon Rose, former longtime editor of Foreign Affairs, as well as adjunct senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, will share his insights into the question of the future of European security with us tonight. As I said, it's great to see so many friends, and it is my great pleasure in particular to welcome the ambassador of the Republic of Latvia to Germany, Alda Vanaga. Thank you very much for coming. And I'm also happy to announce, slightly different note, that we're having a small presidential summit here tonight, and I want to welcome my old friend Peter Miller, the president of the American Academy in Rome, who is visiting. If he starts fundraising. Let me say a word or two. You need to keep things light in a time like this. Let me say a word about the fellowship. The Axel Springer Fellowship at the American Academy in Berlin was initiated in 2003 with the express aim of promoting German-American dialogue in the fields of media, public policy, and other areas of contemporary concern. And we are deeply grateful to Springer SA and its CEO, Matthias Dopfner, a longtime Academy trustee, for their dedicated support over all these years. Previous Axel Springer Fellows in just the last few years have included scholars Mark Koplovich, Holly Case, Mary Cerati, and journalist Deborah Amos, and now Gideon Rose joins their ranks. So about our speaker. I have to admit I've known Gideon for quite some time. When I arrived at the National Security Council staff of the Clinton White House in the fall of 1994, Gideon had arrived a month earlier. He's always getting someplace first. And he was in the Directorate of the Near East and South Asian Affairs. Now, Gideon had the good fortune to find a better job at the Council on Foreign Relations the next year, leaving me behind for another 5.5 years of slave labor. Thanks, pal. At the Council, he was a senior fellow and deputy director for national security studies before becoming the managing editor and then editor of Foreign Affairs, which I think it'd be fair to say might be called the House Journal of the American Foreign Policy Establishment. So a particularly interesting viewpoint to have tonight. In all, Gideon spent over 2 decades at the magazine, 10 plus years at the helm, and he had a really extraordinary tenure that saw the publication go from strength to strength. surprising none of us who knew him. He turned down more of my submissions than I can count. And sometime in all that activity, he also, and we were grateful about this, he found time to work on the selection committee of a fledgling institution in Berlin called the American Academy. So we're very grateful for that. So Gideon's had a connection here for a long, long time. Beginning in 2021, he spent 3 years as the Mary and David Boys Distinguished Fellow in U.S. Foreign Policy at the Council. And he also teaches political science at Columbia University. Gideon holds a BA in classics from Yale, also very relevant right now, and a PhD in government from the other place. He published an excellent volume, How Wars End, with Simon & Schuster in 2011, and he has published innumerable articles in Foreign Affairs as well as in the National Interest. And since Gideon arrived at the Academy last month to work on his project on the future of European security, he and I have had more than a couple of conversations about the upheaval in our world and how far it might go. We exchanged shell-shocked looks over the weekend in Munich. And I think while nothing, and this is a very personal note, not a political note, nothing will allay the pain. But as the old saying goes, misery loves company, and Gideon is especially good company, as you're about to find out. So just for housekeeping, Gideon will speak for about 35 minutes, although he keeps getting new data to incorporate just by looking at his phone. So who knows, it might go a little longer. And after which I will join him on the stage and we'll cry together. And if you are with us at the Academy, please just raise your hand when you want to ask a question. Wait for the microphone. Please make sure your question indeed has a question mark at the end. If you're joining us via Vimeo, please type your question into the Q&A part of the platform. Gideon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan. There will be no crying. There's been enough of that this week, and it's not the way that bullies take you seriously. And it's very important now that we need to be taken seriously. Let me first just say a word about this extraordinary institution. The American Academy in Berlin, which I knew as a haven for intellectuals and incredibly weird specialists with bizarre, interesting, brilliant scholarly subject matter when I was a committee member. Over 25 years, it has been a beacon of Enlightenment values. And to be here and to see it in person is absolutely extraordinary. What Gary and Dan and all the staff here and everybody have created over the last quarter century is a true haven. And I mean, look, let's be serious. We're watching the world slide back into history. And right here, right now, there's no other place I'd want to be. I feel a bit like John the Baptist if he got stuck in traffic and arrived late. When I started this project, it was somewhat not theoretical, but it was still not quite front page news. And as the months have gone by, and as the weeks have gone by, and as the days have gone by, it gets more and more relevant and more difficult to chart. We really could be at a critical juncture in history right now. I mean, we still may not be. We will see. Something really big is happening, and we're trying to figure out what it is. But to be studying it in real time as it happens is very difficult. And finding the right tone and the right sort of degree of certainty is difficult as well. And I was grappling with that. And the talk I'm giving tonight is not the talk I would have given on Monday. And it's not the talk I gave 2 weeks ago in Cologne. And it's not the talk I would have given 3 or 4 months ago. And it probably wouldn't be the talk I would give 2 months from now when a hell of a lot more water has passed under the bridge. But it's the talk that I'm giving now. because that's where we are. Let me see if I can manage to get this to work. Okay. So, future of European security. It's worth starting. Wait, I just saw literally everything is being updated as we speak. There's a news report out now that Trump is planning to rename Philadelphia Avenue. Apparently, he's proposed renaming it Königstrasse. Okay. The Americans will get it a little bit later. What can you do? You laugh to avoid crying. Post-war Europe has been one of the most extraordinary regional journeys in world history. And it's worth beginning by running over that a bit. What has happened here over the last 80 years is nothing short of extraordinary. A continent which had been the source of much of the world's troubles and a deeply militarized, violent, hostile place for many centuries, burst its way into modernity, fought multiple wars, took over much of the world, and then suddenly on a dime turned and became peaceful and calm and democratic and began to show the world a model of a different kind of international relations. Unprecedented peace and stability, spreading out from the West across ever larger circles. Post-war recovery, growth, and progressive economic immigration. Decolonization, maybe they shouldn't have been acquired in the first place. Maybe there was a lot of bad things along the way as everybody left, but still in global history, to have decolonized successfully and got to a place beyond that, major accomplishment, comparatively speaking. The achievement of extraordinary standards of living and broad social welfare to create a quality of life that much of the world does nothing more than envy from a distance. To reunify Germany and successfully expand after the Cold War and bring the zone of peace and security and social harmony to an ever-widening circle. This was not always written in the cards, and many wondered whether it would happen. We've had some discussions here about some people, even fellows, were like, I didn't think this would happen, and it did go this successfully. Europe has become a beacon of democracy, human rights, and international law for much of the world, and a regulatory superpower and a regional model for hordes of people who want to come and want nothing more than to knock on the doors and be let in. It's important to start with all this because these accomplishments are not just real, they are magnificent. That's a Seinfeld joke. You guys will get it later. And they also are potentially in danger for the first time in a while, in a serious way. There are a lot of security challenges in particular. Europe has various different kinds of challenges. Tonight, I'm going to talk about the security challenges. And I define security in a very simple, old-fashioned kind of way, protection against physical and economic coercion. Okay, no, there are a lot of debates in the academic sphere about exactly how to define security. There are various different ways you can define Europe. Let's just say for right now, essentially, whatever you think is Europe and know about it in the EU and some of its environ, and security defined in traditional terms. Not that those are the only issues that are important, but those issues are important and need to be thought of in their own way. So what are those challenges? Okay, gross military weakness vis-a-vis Russia, which we're seeing play out. Energy dependence on Russia, which we're seeing play out. Economic dependence on China. US looming abandonment. And economic stagnation and long-term decline relative to other regions of the world. I'm talking here not only about Germany, but partly about Germany and about Europe more generally. In this case, many of the issues that Germans have to grapple with are also the same as the ones that Europe has to grapple with. So rather than make a specific division among countries, I'm going to talk about the continent, but all these issues are obviously deeply familiar in a German setting in particular. Now, there are two kinds of problems in the world, I'll actually say. I tell my students this. There are the problems that nobody has any clue what to do about. And there are the problems that everybody knows what to do about, but, oops, sorry. Wait, go back. Wait, what am I doing? This is all. This is bad. Can we bring up my deck again? I seem to have screwed it up. Meanwhile, back at the farm. Oh, wait, here it is. Okay. Right there.
There.
Just bring that back up. Okay. Like Europe, I'm bad at technology. At least I got a joke out of it. Okay. There are two kinds of problems. There's the ones we have no idea what to do about. Anybody who works on North Korea or Pakistan or Egypt knows what I mean. I mean, we literally have cycled through every policy in the world towards those three countries, for example, and nobody has any clue which ones work because none of them work. And if you came in to deal with one of those countries now, you'd have problems. And there are other kinds of issues. Arab-Israeli, for example, when everybody knows the answer, but you can't get there because the politics are in the way, right? Europe's problems, interestingly, are all in the second category. None of these challenges are existential problems that are impossible to be dealt with. They're all problems that good, serious technocrats can tell you the answers to. Okay, you want to fix this? Do this. What are those basic? From a technocratic policy perspective. Okay, well, you're militarily weak vis-a-vis Russia. Okay, so increase the level and impact of your military spending. Raise your defense budgets, increase readiness and mobility, buy weaponry, buy enabling capabilities that the US has currently supplying, pool your resources together, consolidate and grow your defense industry and technical industrial base, maybe spread out your nukes, get more nukes, get bombs in the basement, pay for all this with national and continental debt and greater taxes. Obviously, these are problematic, but those would solve the problem of military dependence vis-a-vis Russia. Okay, develop non-Russian sources of energy with a comprehensive mix of gas, nuclear, coal, and renewables. That would get rid of the energy independence problem. It'd be difficult to transition, take some time, but it's plausible. De-risk the China trade to increase economic security. Okay, diversify supply chains, limit sensitive investments, reduce infrastructure dependence, strengthen your trade defense. Any decent IPE person could tell you what needs to be done on economic security in this regard. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy to do it, but it's, pretty straightforward. And finally, the larger question of economic dynamism for the continent as a whole. It's not my area, and it's more contested than some of the other areas, but there's a pretty straightforward playbook that most people would say: capital markets union, single energy market, single services market, regulatory reform and harmonization, labor market reform. There are other things that could be done, but you do those, the economy would hum a lot more, and long-term economic growth would be really kicked upward. Okay, so if there are good responses to all these problems, why aren't they being taken? Well, everyone knows the answers. There are various structural obstacles in the way. There's lack of political support for increased military spending and transnational policy making. Okay, so everything is both national and geared towards butter rather than guns. EU fiscal rules and national debt breaks, like in Germany, limit the amount of debt that can be taken on, which limits the amount of spending, and in a low growth environment prevents expenditures from different kinds of things. Regarding energy, environmental concerns and various other kinds of things get in the way of energy procurement, maximizing energy procurement because of the different priorities of the publics. Decision-making is a nightmare. Instead of being unified in one place for the continent, it operates at multiple levels, national and transnational and intercontinental. And, if you think of the nations and EU and NATO, and all of them have messy democratic decision-making, which makes it almost impossible to get anything done. Fundamentally, the continent has highly regulated economies with aging populations that prioritize stability over innovation and growth. Ooh, you look at the challenges and you say, oh, there are responses. You look at the obstacles in the way and you say, well, that's why the responses aren't getting taken and why nothing will get done. Behind these obstacles lie some larger trends. The long-term de-Bellicization of Europe. An Academy Fellow here 20 years ago, James Sheehan, wrote a wonderful book, which you hadn't read, I suggest you read, called Where Have All the Soldiers Gone? And it's about how Europe went from being the most militarized region of the world to the least militarized region of the world over the course of a century. And so the trends about like defense budgets and lack of concern for defense is not a minor or short-term issue. It's the result of a very deep-rooted long-term trend of de-Bellicization on both the national and the continental level, which makes it very difficult to change. European integration, that weird hybrid three-level thing we talked about, which makes decision-making impossible, is a result of a process that got started and stalled and now is sort of halfway. For an American, it's weird. We read the story of the founding of America, and then there's, the Revolution, there's the Articles of Confederation. It doesn't work well, and so after a decade, you get the Constitutional Convention and the Constitution, which gets you out of the Articles of Confederation and creates a government that actually can work, amalgamates the different things. It's as if Europe got stuck in the Articles of Confederation phase. And for an American, that's really kind of weird, because we don't think about the possibility of a long-term stay in the Articles of Confederation phase, where the colonies are all sort of separate units that don't really have any power above and beyond them. And because that would seem like it would not be particularly good for things. Well, that's what we have here. And finally, over the course of generations, the transatlantic alliance has essentially become imbalanced. You might say in classical terms that the Delian League has turned into the Athenian Empire. Essentially, at least Abhishek got it. The amount of geopolitical responsibility, geopolitical investment, military investment that the United States has taken on has dwarfed that of Europe, which at this point has become largely a regional power where the US has global concerns. And therefore, the imbalance within the transatlantic alliance has made it increasingly one of dependence rather than equality, which has gotten in the way of the kind of harmonious, even though the rhetoric has stayed the same, the imbalance of power has hollowed out in the relationship. Okay, so what are the questions? But they're actually directly relevant to these trends. The big questions at issue here are not ones of exactly how much do you want to spend on defense, or what weapon to buy, or what trade defense to put against Trump. The big questions are these. Will the new external pressure that Putin is placing from the East and Trump's abandonment is placing from the West, will they be sufficient to reverse the fundamental trend of European de-Bellicization? Second, will the addition of a security challenge, serious security challenge, for the first time in a generation, drive integration forward in a way that simple economic voluntary cooperation hasn't been able to? The scholars who study European state-making consider it a weird phenomenon in global history because, as Charles Tilly said famously, war made the state made war. What Europe's superstate or confederation or whatever the weird postmodern creature you want to call the EU is, it has been made by voluntary economic cooperation without a political arm or a security arm. And that's partly been because there has been no real security threat, and what it was taken care of by NATO. But now that the United States, for whatever its own reasons, is moving away from that, the question of whether the emergence of a real security threat will drive a kind of political integration in Europe that hasn't occurred to date, more in the foreign policy and defense and security sphere, remains a major question. And finally, will the US actually decouple itself from European security? I would not have said that was a serious risk. I have come to accept it as a serious risk, and it may even be the reality that we are watching happen. Every week, every day, this week, has represented a further confirmation that this is what is happening in a way that many of us kind of theoretically knew might happen, but never actually believed would. But it is, or at least it is for now. Why is that a risk? Why is that a possibility? Because frankly, the concerns about burden sharing and the pain in the ass of dealing with a transatlantic alliance and the different concerns, these are things that have been part of the transatlantic policy-making debate for generations. Problems in European decision-making, inter-alliance challenges and controversies. This is literally what you call Tuesday in NATO, right? Every 10 years or so, there's another one of these kind of fights, and every generation, there's a giant one. So maybe this is just another one of those kinds of fights. Well, maybe not. And the reason maybe not is because of one man, Donald Trump, and who has apparently decided to end the post-war order and reorient American foreign policy from the liberal international order to something else that seems to be some kind of great power politics, sphere of interest policy in which the United States doesn't have allies. It actually has new friends who are the bad guys, the old bad guys. And it's not clear what world we're going into. Again, that all would have sounded like some kind of weird dystopian fiction up until the last month and up until the last week, but it may be happening. So then the question becomes, why is this happening? Nobody really knows, but there are various different metaphors or models you can use to potentially understand what's going on. It has a domestic component and a foreign policy component. And it's important to understand both, because half of us are going, oh my God, that's what's happening on the domestic side. And half of us are going, oh my God, that's happening on the foreign policy side. And they're both sort of together. So you have to essentially look at different connections. A simple one from American history, imagine this as Wallace squared, right? It's George Wallace's domestic politics with Henry Wallace's foreign policy. Henry Wallace was actually a Soviet agent of influence, in case you didn't know. Good book by Ben Steele on that. And if he actually had become president, you might have actually seen a very different post-war era. Somebody should make a Netflix series about that. Okay, if you want to go to European history or contemporary European history, this is basically sort of illiberal authoritarianism plus Ostpolitik. Okay, it was bad when the Germans did it. It's a hell of a lot worse when the Americans do it. And what you're seeing is the attempted urbanization and the revival of the Dreikaiserbund. For the Americans, that's the alliance between Germany and Austria-Hungary and Russia in the 1870s. So imagine a Hungary-Russia-Washington alliance as the new Dreikaiserbund. I got some laughs over here. Okay. But there are other kinds of traditions. Nobody likes the Nazi analogy. It's not a good thing to bring into debate. Everybody raises totalitarianism way too much. But there are some concepts that actually are applicable potentially to understand what's going on. You have a cult of personality, you have a big lie, you have a bureaucratic radicalization. This is important to talk about because this gives the leader far more power than in the usual, let's say, authoritarian nationalist movement, because of these kind of unique aspects, not an ideological or institutional organization, but a personal cult nearby, or the co-optation of a political movement by a personality cult, one that has no interest in truth, and one where you get points for working towards the leader's thoughts. You see the sort of classic examples of bureaucratic radicalization that we're familiar of in other contexts. And finally, you can imagine today's Republican Party as an AFD-CSU coalition with the AFD on top, right? And that's what explains what might otherwise have been surprising at Munich. If you say, why did J.D. Vance say that? Well, J.D. Vance is a leader of America's version of the AFD. And the Senate Republicans, most of them are sort of members of the American version of CSU. And so the combination of that is what you have now. And so all he was saying was actually, why are you letting in America, essentially it was a transnational political alliance that was disturbing for you guys and all of us watching, but is contemporary politics in America now. So who knows what we'll see after the election. I was pondering all these things while at an archaeological site the other day, like Gibbon in the ruins of the Capitol, mulling about the fall of Rome. I was, wandering around this architectural site, and this settlement mound that I was looking at, with layers of civilization piled on top, was not in Anatolia or the Near East. It was about 10 miles away in Grunewald. And it's called Teufelsberg. How many people here have been to Teufelsberg? Okay, you should all go. Teufelsberg is best understood as a settlement mound, like Troy or Knossos or someplace like that. What are the levels of Teufelsberg? You had a park up until a century. This is 20th century history in one mound, okay? You had a park up until the 30s. The Grunewald was a park, a Berlin park. Then, as part of Albert Speer's Germania, the great big new city, there was a defense technological college built there in the late 30s. That's the little gray building there in this nice Lego recreation. And that got bombed out during the war, never fully completed. And then in the post-war era, with all the rubble in West Berlin that had to be cleared out of Berlin, but stay within the Western zone, where could you dump it? Well, let's dump it on that old technical college defense tech site and make it a mountain. And so they made an artificial mountain of Teufelsberg and called it Teufelsberg because of the Teufelsee nearby. And then what did you put on top of that? Well, the US and the Brits put together a listening post that was essentially an espionage installation picking up signals from East Berlin. And that got decommissioned in 1990 because you no longer had the need to listen in on East German communications. And it became a public park and now is a wonderful contemporary street art gallery, which you have to just see to be believed. It's a post-apocalyptic, glorious, cool place. But as I was thinking about the layers of history that you can pick apart in Teufelsberg, I asked myself, okay, what's going to be the future of Teufelsberg in 50 or 100 years? If this is what it's seen in the last 100 years, what is it going to see in the next 100 years? Will it still be a park? Great views of the city. Will it be an oligarch's mansion, maybe, in some new regime? Will it go back to being a defense technological college for the good guys this time? Will it go back to being a military installation? And if so, whose? NATO's? Europe's? Germany's? China's? Russians? Who knows? Interesting question. What will the future history of Teufelsberg be? There are some, I gather you have to quote Marx at these things, so mine is going to be from 18th Brunner. Classic discussion of structure and agency in history. Men make history, but not as they choose. They don't make it under circumstances of their own choosing, but from circumstances already existed, given and transmitted from the past. To understand, you have to understand structure and agency, and that together produces history. But Donald Trump and a bunch of other people operate under a very different historical framework and a world historical framework, theory of history. They don't think about the structures. They just think about the agency. They are Carlylean. We were at a lunch, some of us, with David Sanger of the Times yesterday, and he said, you have to understand Donald Trump. You have to understand his notion of the great man theory of history, okay? Great man theory of history is, I think it, I'm a great man, I'm going to put it into action. That may be what we're witnessing. And frankly, the world we are living in today is the product of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, far more than various structural forces and various larger trends that social scientists talk about. And the fact that you can't name a European person to put in that kind of lineup makes it difficult to have the kind of agency that a strong man can deliver, which is an interesting challenge going forward. Finally, I also understand that it's obligatory by law to include this Monet quote in any discussion of Europe, which is the classic quote that I have always believed that Europe will be forged in crises and it will be the sum of the solution to those crises. So the big question is, are we entering another Monet-ish crisis that will drive the union forward? And if so, how will agency come into the picture? Because the obstacles to action that I talked about were real. They were structural. It was not that the answers aren't there. It's that there are things getting in the way of the answers. There are obstacles. And so the question is, will anything or anyone come along to clear away some of those obstacles? And will this crisis that we are entering be enough to produce that? I don't know. Maybe some of you do, but that's the kind of question we're actually asking now. Recommendations, given all this, it's difficult, but essentially do whatever the hell is necessary to keep Ukraine in the game. If we're walking away, you have to come in. And that means, if necessary, use the frozen Russian assets. If necessary, use emergency, various kinds of debt funding. Somebody has to keep Ukraine going, or all of us will suffer even more. Not just for moral reasons, but for strategic reasons. They are on the front lines. They not only deserve our help, they are doing all of our defense for us. And if they go down, and if we let them go down, history will not only judge us very badly on moral grounds, it will judge us very badly on practical grounds as well. This is the fight of our time right now. We cannot wait and pick another later on. And if we do, we will be covered in shame, and we will have an even bigger fight. Okay, there are some people in Europe who understand this right now, actually. And the Nordic Baltic 8 and Poland are seized with the problem. We have an ambassador here tonight. She understands what I'm saying. And these are, I was struck at Munich by the sort of near unanimity that the people from the north and east had about what needed to be done, and the fact they were doing it. The Danes have already announced a kind of major reinvestment militarily just today or yesterday. That's really significant, and that should be a sort of model going forward. Do whatever else is done, and eventually pray that the U.S. can come to its senses. And when you say this is not possible, I mean, there are basically four futures that I can see, and this is where I'll wrap up. I've been wrong on enough things to not trust my judgment about what is possible. So revitalization of Europe leads the list. I don't really see how it's going to happen, but I didn't see Donald Trump coming either. And so something may come along that makes serious revitalization happen. Muddling through. If everybody behaves like Denmark and things go forward enough and there are enough reforms made, enough purchases made, Ukraine stays in the game enough to keep things going, we could be pretty much sort of same kind of place we've been for another decade or two. It's possible. Not beyond the bounds that sort of Trump isn't determined to ruin everything, but just burden share. And if the slack is picked up, much of the world could go forward, maybe not with the affection, but the transatlantic alliance could stay together for the kids of peace and prosperity, even after there's been betrayal. There could be a worse scenario of essentially let Ukraine go, let the U.S. go, and continued gradual stagnation and decline. Now, Europe is very rich. It's very powerful. It's not entirely likely it's going to be, Putin isn't Hitler. It's highly unlikely that anybody's going to come over through the tanks aren't going to come through the Fulda Gap anymore. And there's a lot of ruin in a nation, a lot of stagnation in a continent. It could be a nice gradual glide path down. But there could also be some kind of crisis along the way. We let Ukraine go, the Baltics, not at all implausible that they're next. I'm not sure that would actually happen, but if you're Vladimir Putin, you think you might be able to get away with it. So there are serious people who do think it's going to happen, and I wouldn't be shocked if it did. Eventually, there could be some kind of domestic internal upheaval in one of the countries here that could fundamentally change the game. So these are the different kind of options. And, we have an election coming up here in a few days, and in other places. Canada has one coming up, and others have one. And what I'd like to see, and this is what I'll close on, and what I would recommend, and I think what would be politically viable, and maybe even create the base for the kind of revitalization, would be a response in kind. And, we know how this would go if we were making this movie in Hollywood or even in Babelsberg, right? We would close the movie, because it would sell a lot better with a happy ending, with this. Let's play.
It's great scotch.
Wait, no, that's not the right one. It's the speech.
I'll be going then.
Okay, we have
Evidently, I hope to see much more as our two great countries work toward a better future.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Peter.
Mr. President, has it been a good visit?
Very satisfactory indeed. We got what we came for, and our special relationship is still very special.
And Prime Minister?
I love that word, relationship. It covers all manner of sins, doesn't it? I fear that this has become a bad relationship. A relationship based on the president taking exactly what he wants and casually ignoring all those things that really matter to Britain. We may be a small country, but we're a great one too. A country of Shakespeare, Churchill, the Beatles, Sean Connery, Harry Potter, David Beckham's right foot, David Beckham's left foot, come on. And a friend who bullies us is no longer a friend. And since bullies only respond to strength, from now onward, I will be prepared to be much stronger. And the president should be prepared for that.
As I said. Okay. So that's what I'd like to see. That's how the movie ends well. And if we don't see that, I don't particularly like the way this movie ends. And that's the point at which I'll stop and we can take our questions.
I stay here? No, you come over here, but bring your glass. I don't want you to get perched. What movie was that?
What? That was Love Actually.
It was Love Actually. One of the worst movies ever made.
I did not realize that in some circles it is now a absolutely must-see
Every
Christmas
Christmas.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't teach you in Jewish studies that you're going to have to watch Home Alone and Home Alone 2 and Love Actually and there's a whole
Home for the
modern
holidays.
Christmas. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that comprehensive dissection of the current dilemma or the current quandary. And it's been a long time since anyone quoted Carlyle here, so I'm glad about that. It gives me the opportunity to tell my Carlyle joke.
Okay.
Carlyle's biographer was not impressed with Carlyle. Said there must be a beneficent God because he married Carlyle to Mrs. Carlyle, thereby creating only 2 unhappy people instead of 4, which is also a hopeful thing for our current situation. All right, enough Carlyle jokes. You dodged the one thing that I was hoping you were going to get to, among all the other things, which is what in your month here of temperature taking, and I know that it's a fast-moving, a fast-changing subject, but you think Europeans are going to get their act together?
When I started looking at this issue seriously, I was concerned to, as a good technocrat type like you, I was concerned to figure out the solutions. So what were the problems and what were the solutions? And to my surprise, it seemed that there was actually fairly serious, obvious consensus on what the problems were and pretty good consensus on what the solutions were. Okay, so why aren't they being done? And more than that, there was a lot of lip service paid to all this. These are the first half of this talk could have been given at any time over the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years in some cases. I mean, these discussions have been going on forever. And at every time they go on, people sort of have nice statements to the effect that we need to solve them, we will solve them, here's a committee that will solve them, here's a new intergovernmental organization to help solve them. And so I was sort of really getting more and more puzzled by, if everybody knew the problems and everybody knew the solutions and everybody had the mechanisms by which they could be solved, why the problems persisted. And that's what led me to the larger structural context, because of these this omitted variable bias. What was getting in the way? The officials weren't lying when they said they wanted to solve the problems. They weren't stupid in not recognizing the solutions, but there was always a gap between the words they would say and the policies that would follow. And I finally realized, okay, it's these national political climates and systems that are driving this, that make it impossible for people to do what the technocrats think should be done. And so the frog keeps boiling. And what I have, actual frogs don't boil. We know this, by the way, but as a metaphor, it still works, because sometimes human frogs, or frogs in human suits, or humans in frog suits, do boil. And right now, Europe, it's getting pretty hot. We're going from the hot tub stage to something more. And the question is whether Europe will jump out into the snow, maybe, and be all calm again. You and I were at Munich, and I don't know about you, but each time I talked to somebody from one side or the other, I would, about what Trump was doing, half the people would be, oh, this is a negotiating tactic. Half, no, he means that the order is over. And it was only when we saw what happened with Russia in the last couple of days that question was answered pretty definitively in the, oh, no, he means it. In the same kind of way, if you look at the problems and the functional reasons they should be solved now, you get very optimistic, because of course this crisis should be enough to drive the adoption of solutions that are sitting there waiting to be done, that aren't impossible at all. Write a check. But the more I imbibe the European atmosphere and talk to people, the more I realize the political realities are so strongly in the other way, and the institutional obstacles so great, that I've come to think that stasis is the most likely scenario. I mean, there's been a lot of progress. I shouldn't minimize this. And all the areas I mentioned, the situation is significantly better than it was a decade ago, significantly better than it was 5 months ago. And among the technocrats, at least, there's even greater willingness and urgency now than there was 5 days ago. But the changes that have been made are tiny compared to what need to be made to actually address the real problems at issue. And the idea that we're at a level of Monetian crisis enough to, spur dramatic adoption of dramatically different policies. I had thought, to my surprise and great pleasure, that the Zeitenwende was that. That was shocking, and in a positive way. But it seems to have sort of petered out, far short of what is necessary. And I'm not particularly hopeful. And I wonder whether it might be necessary for one of the Baltics to suffer Ukraine's fate, for the West to wake up. And I'm not sure that'll happen.
So, I mean, I think that's a plausible analysis. I would just say that I think that it's incredibly unfortunate that Germany doesn't have a government, or has a caretaker government. Canada has a caretaker government. France has barely a government at this particular moment. And it's really quite extraordinary. But I do think, that some of the things that are happening, like coalescing around the idea that regulations governing the amount of government debt will be suspended insofar as goes to defense spending. I think that makes a difference. I do think, and many here will know better than I do, that whether or not the Germans, I believe, the next government will suspend the Steuerbremse, the tax break. But I do also feel like Europe, like the Democratic Party, is waiting for the leader who's going to really galvanize people and say, this is a real threat, and we really need to do something. I do agree with you that leader is most likely to come from Northeastern Europe, where they really care.
We were discussing this at dinner, and I asked some of my extremely well-informed dinner companions, why no politician on the eve of the elections gave a speech like Hugh Grant in order to gain the democratic legitimacy and mandate to make significant changes after the election, and perhaps to gain a populist boost of nationalism by people who are proud of their country and don't like seeing it bullied by Billy Bob Thornton in his current form. And I was told anybody who gave that speech would drop in the polls rather than rise in the polls, and that this would be a political loser. So I agree with you, of course, on everything we should do, but no politician's going to say that. Our best hope is they sneak in, form a coalition, and maybe do a little more spending. So that strikes me as what the smart money here would predict. I just don't know whether that's going to be enough.
Let's go to the other side of the Atlantic and ask a question. Is there something that's going to slow down this juggernaut?
So we were also talking about this at dinner, as we are at every meal these days. We have a spectacular group of people here as fellows, and they represent the best of America, even as we're all sitting around watching the worst of America. And we're talking about this at practically every meal because all of us are feeling the effects of it. Some of them have family members losing jobs in the purges. Some of them have seen their life's work upended in public health or foreign policy or other areas. Many of us know people who are suffering severely because of the USAID cutoffs and much of the other cutbacks. And so the thing that I can't see yet is we know that Trump only respects countervailing force. There's no mercy here. And actually since there's a sadistic element of dominance to this domestically and internationally, seeming weak actually gets you in for more punishment. So the attempt to appease doesn't work. On the other hand, there is a transactional aspect. You might say everyone knows the Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. Well, the 5 stages of Trump grief are slightly different. It's denial, anger, depression, acceptance, bargaining. See, it takes a little while to get in. Here all week, guys, right? There could be a bargain to be had, and if he feels that he's getting a better deal, or if he meets punishment, he pushes back, or he gets pushed back. So the hope for domestic stuff, since we can't count on the Congress, and since we can't count on the administration, and since we can't count on the corporate community, we can count on the courts, but the courts have the problem of not having any independent enforcement activity, and norms can be broken by people who don't care. Whether they will actually go that far as to not enforce a court ruling, or if the court rulings are in their favor on some of these issues, that won't be a hole there. So frankly, the saving grace from the perspective of stopping this is that even if not all the causes they are pushing are stupid or wrong, because the government certainly can be cut, and there certainly can be a lot more efficiency, and there certainly can be a lot more directed activity in positive places in various matters. The speed and recklessness and incompetence with which they're doing this is inevitably going to be felt in downstream consequences for individuals. And so people who are affected by it may well complain, and that complaint may result in political pressure, and that may result in the Republicans in Congress finally stopping. But that'll take a while. 2 years, 4 years, whatever. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I have lots more questions for you, Gideon, but I think it's time to open it up. So, questions? Please wait for the microphone.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for this great talk or this great presentation. I have a question. I would like to say, I'm asking how stupid can this administration be to believe that the United States will survive in the midterm, such isolated as it will come in the next days? Because in the end, the United States will end, you said it, without any allies, but with a lot of enemies who are laughing about them and will take the best out of it.
There's a lot of ruin in a nation. That was said 200 years ago plus. The United States is very strong. Its position is very favorable, and it can sort of go a long way without running into gross problems that are politically recognized, and in an environment that people aren't necessarily paying attention to foreign policy in the first place. News in the second place of any kind, political news, are tuned out or are driven by partisan leanings. The confidence I used to have that the feedback mechanism between reality and politics, or the connection between politics and markets, will play out effectively, that's been shaken. And so we'll just have to wait and see how long this goes.
I see a hand on the back. I only see a hand. I'm sure there's a person attached to it.
Thank you. I'm Manfred Nitsch. I'm a professor of political economy at the Freie Universität, and I have a question. When you define security as how to deal with dangerous external forces, isn't climate change something you would have to deal with too, as well as migration? So the pressure on Europe from the south and on the population side?
I agree entirely, and environmental issues, climate change, are ultimately going to be an existential threat, and migration is a very deeply serious issue that obviously is politically hugely significant, and they are somewhat related. I see no reason not to focus on the traditional security threats as well. In other words, you can get depressed about many things simultaneously. And I meant no disrespect to the people who are tearing their hair out about other issues, but the traditional old-fashioned security issues in the economic and military sphere tend to become rather urgent every once in a while, and they can make the longer-term or more abstract issues push them off the front page news. So I absolutely understand, and I understand that in the past, over the last couple of decades, many have felt the pressures of old-fashioned traditional military and economic security less pressing to the point where they could focus in a sort of Maslowian hierarchy of values on post-materialist issues of everything from identity politics to climate and environment, to other kinds of similar issues of human or other kind of security. But while that was happening and the eyes got taken off the ball of old-fashioned military and economic security, which are now back in play.
I saw a hand somewhere on the other side of the Wannsee back there. No, well, I was going even further back, but you can do that afterward, Julian. Okay.
Klaus Wittmann, Potsdam University. I have a question. I saw that the bust of Winston Churchill was returned to the Oval Office. I even saw a photo with Trump celebrating that. Do you think there is anybody who could explain to him who Chamberlain was and what he did? That he sacrificed the Sudetenland, went back to England and said, "Peace for our times." That he almost got the Peace Nobel Prize. That half a year later, the rest of Czechoslovakia was destroyed, and another half year later, the Second World War began. Do you think somebody could explain that to him?
They've tried, and he doesn't listen for a variety of reasons. One, because he lives in the short term, not the long term. Second, because he doesn't give a damn about Czechoslovakia. And by extension, anything that he's not directly personally involved in. And because he doesn't understand the interconnected nature of the liberal order that he's taking apart. In the first term, after about 6 months, the military was so concerned that what was happening, that the Joint Chiefs had an all-day meeting. They invited him to come to the tank at the Pentagon for an offsite, for a one-day conference in which they explained the logic of America's contemporary empire and what kept the order and global security in place in terms of alliances and economic connections and military commands and so forth, so that he would understand the severity of the issues. And they meant it as a kind of tutorial to the newcomer coming in, the way a new congressman would go to the Kennedy School for a course on, public policy. Now they've, having been a funeral director in some place and whatever, and now, okay, this is what you should look at this. And Trump was pissed off and bored and rejected it all and simply refused to accept it. And that was the meeting that Rex Tillerson, walking out of, said to somebody and was overheard saying to somebody, "He's a fucking moron." It was on the way out of that meeting. So he's heard this, and if you could get in there and persuade him, that'd be difficult. Look, let me tell you an anecdote from New York real estate. I'm from a New York real estate family, and I grew up having Donald Trump held up as the example of what not to do in the field. And there was when he was building Trump Tower in the Baker, it was on the place of the old Bonwitz Tellers. I don't know if any of you remember a nice old department store, very high class department store. And they had a couple of beautiful Art Deco medallions on the front of the store, the flagship store. And everybody was saying, "Oh, you can't tear this down. We should save the medallions." And a movement came to save the medallions in some way. And the landmarks preservation movement was getting galvanized and was about to declare them a landmark. And in the middle of the night, Trump sent in wrecking balls and bulldozers to take down the building. And did it in the middle of the night so that there was no longer an issue because the medallions were gone. And Ada Louise Huxtable, the architecture critic of the New York Times at the Times, wrote a blistering front page story above the fold about the tragedy of the destruction of these medallions. And this story said, in building what he claims will be the most expensive, most prestigious building in New York, Trump has ravaged our history and destroyed our architectural heritage, and went on in a scathing thing. And somebody the next day, or later that day, asked Trump, "Donald, did you see Ada's story? What did you think about it? Were you upset by it?" He said, "Upset? Are you kidding? Did you see what it said? I had 5 Japanese inquiries about offices in the new building before the paper appeared on my doorstep in the morning. It said I'm building the biggest, most expensive, fanciest building in New York." That was such great publicity. I wish there were 2 more medallions so that I could destroy them too. That's the kind of person you're dealing with.
All right, there was another hand way back there. You better get the right one, Julian. Good.
Gabriel Deutscher. I'm an attorney in Berlin, and my question would be again regarding Article 5. So from what we saw over the last week, I think everybody has sort of a feeling in Europe that Article 5 is very much in danger and probably not existing in a practical life anymore. So if we look at the upcoming 1 to 3 years, what does this mean for Europe? For what are the most important steps? How to step up the defense in Europe?
It's a very these guys are clever. They got a lot of stuff blocked in the first term because they didn't know what to do or how to do it, and there were a lot of traditionalists around. And this time around, they've decided to do it differently. First of all, they stocked their upper echelons and middle level echelons, and even trying to stock the lower level echelons with followers and ideological, or rather not even ideological, personal. The price for admittance is, do you follow the line of the day, whatever the line of the day may be? It's not even an ideological line. It's if we the old Soviet Union used to have encyclopedias in 3-ring binders, right? So that you could switch out the stories whenever they changed. There's something about that in the government now. And so the loyalty question now is, will you say boo whenever we change out whatever the plan is? So it's not ideological, it's personal allegiance. And they realized that the courts could get in the way if you did things too stupidly or abruptly. And so they're staying within legal guidelines, or at least semi-plausible legal guidelines, in order to not destroy institutions, but hollow them out. And so I don't actually worry, as I thought I used to worry, about Trump pulling out of NATO. I now worry about him hollowing out NATO from the inside. So that the Article 5 guarantee, it means whatever you say it means. I mean, hell, read the Budapest guarantee and let Ukraine tell you how that's doing for them. The Article 5 only means as much as whether it'll be enforced or how it'll be enforced. They could send flowers. So the question of a European pillar of NATO may well be settled. Many people here have probably done a lot of NATO work over the years, and the question of should there be a European pillar of NATO has been a perennial, endless shelves. Trees have been felled, forests have been felled to produce books and articles on things like the should there be an independent pillar of NATO. Well, if the United States just stops doing anything with its stuff, might well have a European pillar by default. So you might as well have it one. The question is not whether there will be a European pillar of NATO, but whether it will be capable of doing anything by itself. Right now you have forces, you just don't have the connecting material, the enabling capacities, the extra ammunition, and frankly, you were talking about the East. It doesn't even require that much these days, just require a check. I've been struck by how the Nordic and Baltic countries and East European countries are willing to do the fighting for the West, willing to man the barricades. Poland is consciously positioning itself as a stronghold in the East. Ukraine could be made a stronghold below that. Finland and the Baltics and the Nordic states are positioning themselves to gird the loins at the top. Not the loins, whatever's on top of the loins. Gird that, put on a helmet and grease or whatever.
Headband, yeah.
What primarily matters now is recognizing the need, being willing to coordinate on a not just national level, and to write the damn checks to purchase the equipment and fund the people who are prepared to do the hard work of providing for old-fashioned security.
So 2 follow-ups to that. One, isn't the way to Donald Trump's heart with lots of weapon purchases and liquefied natural gas, all of which is in Europe's interest?
I would split it. I would buy some from the U.S. You're absolutely right. If the fifth stage of Trump grief is bargaining, yeah, you can do something. And so that was it. But it's also clear that even if you buy him off, that's not a long-term solution to the fundamental problem. And Europe needs its own independent military capability. And it needs to be able to have that effective. I did not think that until this week.
And
I went back and forth.
relatedly, are we falling prey to the habit of making the enemy 10 feet tall? So, you know, the Russians, yes, they have nuclear weapons and they can commit nuclear blackmail, which would be a big and bold step. But, you know, as Tony Blinken famously said, you know, they're not the strongest military in Europe. They're not even the strongest military in Ukraine. And, you know, it seems like there is a fair amount of capability in Europe. It's not where it should be. But the Russians have taken unbelievable losses. And maybe Europe should just take a deep breath and think about how it goes forward.
So I agree with what you're saying, but you have a very short-term problem. I mean, to bring Carlyle back into it, the miracle of the House of Brandenburg. Peter III comes in and saves saves Frederick with a change of government, right? Even as he was about to lose. You may be very well right that Putin, certainly by later this year, is going to be in deep financial trouble. Maybe not right now, but the best guess is that by the end of the year, things start to get really bad and just get worse from there. But we have to get to the end of the year. And if there is no Ukraine by the end of the year, then his problems will be skirted over and we'll go on to the next stage. So all it takes is to write a damn check now and send weapons now, or use the damn 300 billion frozen assets that are sitting there now to get to the place where you outlast him.
Joshua, is that you? No, that's Joshua.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to
I'm
do your
pretty
question,
sure.
Adam. You can go next. What to do about the fact, Gideon, you've mentioned in a few different ways that in a lot of European countries, the very sensible, necessary solutions you've mentioned simply aren't that popular, and that Europeans more broadly in a lot of countries don't want to do and wouldn't vote for the kinds of measures that you're describing, however necessary and sensible they are. And so what then? How can European leaders do this against the will of their democratic societies?
Well, that's a great question. I would say two things about it. One is that it doesn't seem to me they're trying to push hard against the public opinion. Again, I'd like to, when Justin Trudeau is not exactly a beloved leader in Canada. When Justin Trudeau responded to Trump in a pretty strong way, when Carney and Joly and Freeland and the other liberal aspirants and leaders responded toughly, their numbers went up rather than down. What you need is political leadership that isn't afraid to risk. Put it this way. The big problem on the tech front and the economic front is a lack of innovation and dynamism and creative destruction and entrepreneurship more generally. And the same problem is true in the politics. People need to be willing to take risks and tell people why they should follow, and maybe some will follow. And maybe, you know, and so we don't know if it won't work until it's tried. And I haven't seen any particular leaders trying. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's why one of the options is decline, right? We have people here studying imperial decline in the Mughal Empire, elsewhere. There's another one who I feel, actually the guy studying Mughal imperial decline, his wife is a historian who studies how the Manchus took over and fashioned a new imperial system in China. And I find those stories deeply depressing and relevant to contemporary politics as our imperial decline is, executed by a Manchurian candidate. Decline is Charles Krauthammer used to say, and of course this used to be the charge leveled at Democrats, decline is a choice. The US is making that choice now. And that will actually pose Europe with a choice. Does it want to go along for the ride as well and be an arena for world politics? Or does it want to be an actor in world politics? Does it want to display agency? And if so, how? Because, as people say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Glad we all ate already. Okay, a question from the home audience. We all know what a burden the U.S. took upon itself to free Europe of Hitler in World War II. Do Americans view the endorsement of the AfD as a betrayal?
Many of us do. The vast majority of the ones who would understand that sentence do. And that probably represents maybe mid-single digits of the population. I don't know, what was your guess be? What percent of the American public would be able to identify the AfD?
Yeah, 10 or less.
10 or less. I would say 10 is way much. Jeff, what do you say?
Less than 4.
Less than 4. So yes, 3.5 out of the 4% that heard that sentence are shocked, horrified, and walking around in a permanent monk's dream at what's going on. Actually, no. 2.5, 2% of them are, because the other 1.5% are going around in the scream because about being fired or having their kid fired, or about thinking about the people with AIDS who are going to die because PEPFAR is going to be unfunded, and the other 96% are, I don't know, watching Shark Week.
Cameron, wait for the mic. Gives you a chance to compose your thoughts.
I wanted to ask. Well, thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask if it's maybe more possible to imagine this revitalization you're describing, if it's more defensive than the metaphor of the West tends to be, which is more value laden, more missionary in context. Is maybe Europe's future, or should Europe's future be to aim for something like Switzerland? I mean, basically like a well-defended territory that is otherwise neutral with respect to a lot of the conflicts happening around the world. Is that would that maybe make that revitalization easier to achieve?
It's an interesting scenario, a kind of little Europe, but a little porcupine Europe, where the bonsai armies were collected enough to make a little forest of bonsai armies that were sufficient, like the Knights of Ni with their shrubberies. As my people say, from your lips to God's ears. That would be a start. And once you're there, we'll see.
Well, I mean, Cameron, no one's talking about having real lift so that Europeans can defend Taiwan.
Yeah, but I mean, the speech you showed is a sort of it is maybe if we just lower the stakes, it'll make it easier to like kind of
I agree, and if they did that, if that was done and was succeeded, then there might be, again, I don't think he's going to fundamentally break ties, and that would be a good base. The thing about what I said, and it's worth doing, is it's worth doing for multiple reasons. It's worth doing for European security. It's worth doing for European prosperity. It's worth doing for the sake of the transatlantic alliance. It's worth doing to get Trump off one's back. And the sadness, or one bit of the sadness of this, is that not everything this asshole is saying is wrong. And
this is a family institution.
sorry, not everything the president is saying is wrong. The vice president is saying is wrong. And the question is also sort of, and there's a real danger, because objecting to everything that is being said, because that itself is nationalism and resistance, is a dumb idea, because some of the things that are being said are actually smart and intelligent and necessary. And so whether Europe wants to be independent, whether it wants to be autonomous, or whether it just wants to have options, all of those courses are better served by doing what I laid out than anything else. So you don't have to decide about which of those ultimate long-term goals you want to go towards, because acquiring significant independent geopolitical capacity and protecting what you have is the first step in all of them.
Adam.
Thanks for the great talk, Gideon. Someone mentioned the AfD earlier, and the AfD, of course, is one of many far right-wing parties in Europe whose ideology more or less tracks with that of Donald Trump, fueled by some of the same resentments. How do you think the prospects for European integration, or rearmament for that matter, are going to be affected by the emergence of these parties that are often quite anti-EU, that aren't interested in that project to begin with, and that do enjoy more than a modicum of popular support?
It's a great question. I, of course, don't really have a good answer to it. No one does. But I guess my answer would be to borrow Cameron's answer, which is that you sell it on national defense and increased capability, and you find ways to make it work, and you combine it with some kind of you put together a package that includes homeland security and geopolitical security, and nobody has any particularly good answer. But look, the fundamental challenge of the Union is not just to pool together to create greater economic growth. It's also to require sort of political, democratic solutions that can constrain the negative effects of capitalism, while keeping the goose laying golden eggs and protecting itself. And so how to solve all those problems together, how to get economically strong enough, geopolitically strong enough, and make sure that the downsides of capitalism are constrained enough to win popular support from a broad cross-class coalition, rather than having a bunch of oligarchs running around owning everything. That's the trifecta, the trilemma that has to be mastered. And this is what great political talents are supposed to be for. And so I'm waiting and hoping for I'm just a policy guy. I'm not a politician. But the politicians are the ones who interest aggregate their way to a solution in crisis that works well.
There was a hand in the back that went up first. It's still up.
Thank you. Riginka, I happen to be a banking lawyer. Given the fact that the biggest challenge since the Asian pivot, apparently the Asian conflict scenario may be at stake here, and we need probably more to focus as Europeans as much as the Americans do into this field of the scenarios that may occur in closer future, near future, whatever. Where do you see the current AUKUS and Quad alliance? Are they capable of conventionally prevailing in a potential conflict scenario in that region? And what would that mean in terms of, does it make sense for us as Europeans to rather engage even with Trump in trying to kind of divide or split a little bit the ever closer alliance between Russia and China? Thanks.
We're only paying him to do European
security.
I
don't think it's really possible at this point to peel Russia off from China or China off from Russia. Under the current Russian regime, I just don't see any significant ability to do that. And I'm a little bit less worried about China in the short term than others are, while still being worried in the long term. So I don't see China attacking Taiwan. I would expect further. God, who knows what that? No one knows. No one knows nothing. My odds aren't better than anybody else's. But if I had to bet, I would bet on a Russian attack on the Baltics before a Chinese attack on Taiwan. But the long-term future with China is a serious one, and the question there becomes one of economic competition, and that requires revitalization and economic security. Not just one, not just the other. In other words, I mean, you all know this. What's happening to the car industry with the entire future of economic vehicles being Chinese. That's rather important to Germany. There are, and the question of how to get to the next stage of defense industrial technology, AI technology, future technology. These are the kind of long-term questions in China that I worry about more than the immediate security concerns. Because the US and AUKUS are doing enough, and these guys, even the lie, by the way, it's a total lie. And that's a good word to use. It is a total lie to say that we have to take US troops and forces out of Europe in order to pay for the new aggression in the new defenses in the Pacific. We can do both. It's easy to do both. Europe doesn't cost us that much, as we know. Like foreign aid, it's a small price to pay for the values that is gotten for it, even though these guys don't see it. So it's voluntary. But we're going to spend enough on Asia to be okay with China as well, because you can easily gin up a yellow peril in America, and Congress is now fully seized with that threat. So I worry, my worry there is there'll be too much performative blustering first, rather than a long, slow buildup, which is what's really needed to maintain security in Asia.
Although I think what Secretary Rubio and the National Security Advisor are telling themselves is that they're peeling Russia off from China.
I wonder what they're telling themselves. I literally, I know a decent. The true believers are true believers, and the utter careerists are utter careerists, and grifters will grift. But there are a lot of decent people. Again, if you think of the Republican Party as an AFD, CSU coalition, the people who are the equivalent of the CSU types, the people who were like the senators we talked to in Munich. There were 30 senators in Munich, including many, many Republicans. And all they would talk to you about was how much they love NATO and how important the transatlantic alliance were and how much Ukraine was important. And this week they've said crickets.
Crickets, yeah. So last question, was it right here?
That's what I can't understand.
It has to be a short one, I'm afraid, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
Let me go drink.
Yeah.
Don't want to keep you. Sorry, don't want to keep you from your drink. My name is Timo Graf. I'm a scientific advisor to the Ministry of Defense. The one question I'm pondering right now is, when we think of Europe as an actor, we always think of it in terms of the EU framework as it exists today. And you already mentioned, as you call them, the NB8, the Nordic and the Baltic countries. You can also maybe count in the UK, the Netherlands, and potentially Poland, now that they've lost their super ally, the US, right? Right? So it's kind of like a Nordic alliance of like-minded countries who are maybe willing to step up, right, to the defense of Europe, right? And we need to remind ourselves that these are sovereign nations. No Hungarian Orban leader can sabotage them by vetoing anything. If these countries decide to take cooperation in the defense realm further, maybe that would be enough. After all, Putin is aiming his sights on the Baltic, not so much on Portugal right now. So the question is, what do you think? Is this an idea that we can entertain, that we remind ourselves of the sovereignty of these nations, and that maybe their cooperation would be enough to save what we have?
So I'm going to say some outrageous things in response to that. I raised exactly that point to a friend of mine, a Belgian friend, real expert, knows much more about this stuff than I do. And I said, can the Balts spur the defense spending and the foreign policy things that are necessary and get things going and jumpstart cooperation, which others can then join in? And his response was, Gideon, there are more Flemish than Balts. So it's just not realistic for them to do it. And there is a great equalizer. And if I were in that circle, that crescent, I would be thinking about nuclear weapons. If I were Poland, I would have a bomb in the basement. If I were the members of the Nordic and Baltics, I would be talking to France about deployment, or I would be thinking about it. And if I were Ukraine, I'd be going, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I've been down this path once. I gave them up. How do I get them back? We don't talk about the nuclear stuff because it's sort of we don't talk about the nuclear stuff. But if we also didn't talk about the end of the post-war order. The deal was America provides security, brings people in under the American nuclear umbrella, and other people don't have to do that. Well, if America is removing its nuclear umbrella and hollowing out its security guarantees and walking away, why the hell wouldn't Taiwan, South Korea, Northern Europe, Eastern Europe get nukes? It's the smart move, or at least, again, preparing for it. Not talking about it, just laying the groundwork for it.
Yeah. Let me just say on behalf of the American Academy in Berlin, we don't support breaking the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But we do believe that our fellows have the right to entertain these thoughts. I really want to thank Gideon for a fabulous presentation and for bringing such great humor to such a depressing set of issues, because we can only laugh while we encourage people to build up and start making their howitzers and the like. I had somewhere there's a whole list of upcoming events. I think it's on the printer upstairs because it's not in my remarks. Check out the website. I know we have a great event coming up with Jeff Goldberg, editor of The Atlantic, Ann Applebaum, and George Packer very soon. Jeff will be doing a couple of other events while in town. Most of these events are probably sold out in terms of being there in person, but they'll all be viewable online. Again, I want to thank Gideon for a fabulous talk, and thank you for being a fabulous audience. That was really fun.